My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm 68 years old. I'm writing this from a care facility in Olympia, Washington, where the nurses think I spend my days watching game shows and doing crossword puzzles. They don't know that I'm finally ready to tell the truth about what happened to me 31 years ago. In 1994, I disappeared for 9 months. The official story was that I extended my research in Alaska, working on volcanic cave systems for my doctorate. My university accepted this explanation. My ex-husband believed it. Even my daughter Emily, who was 15 at the time, eventually stopped asking questions. But I was never in Alaska. I was 60 feet underground in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, living in an ancient shelter with a creature that most people believe is a myth. I was trapped there at first, injured and terrified. But I stayed by choice, learning lessons about humanity that I've carried like stones in my pockets ever since. People ask me why I'm telling this now, after keeping silent for 3 decades. The answer is simple. I'm dying. The cancer started in my lungs 6 months ago and spread faster than anyone expected. I have maybe 3 months left, possibly less. My daughter found my journal last week while helping me sort through belongings. She read enough to know I've been lying to her for her entire adult life. She deserves the truth. Maybe you do too. I was a geologist, specialized in volcanic cave formations. I spent years mapping lava tubes and underground systems, documenting structures that formed thousands of years ago when molten rock carved tunnels through the earth. It was solitary work, technical and precise, perfect for someone trying to forget that her marriage had collapsed and her daughter wouldn't speak to her. I threw myself into my research with the kind of desperation that people mistake for dedication. I worked alone, often for weeks at a time, camping in remote areas where cell phones didn't work and the nearest person might be 20 miles away. I told myself I was pursuing knowledge. Really, I was running from everything I'd broken. In February of 1994, I found something that wasn't on any map, a cave entrance hidden behind a rockfall in an area I'd surveyed twice before. Something about it felt wrong immediately. Too organized, too deliberate. But I went in anyway. That decision changed everything. I spent 9 months in darkness with something that watched me with eyes more human than animal. Something that grieved and thought and taught me things about my own species that I wish I didn't know. Something that was dying, just like I am now. I never took photographs. I destroyed my field notes. I sealed the entrance as I promised I would. For 30 years, I've kept this secret, visiting the site dozens of times, but never telling a soul until now. This is what happened in that shelter. This is what I learned. This is why some mysteries should stay buried, and why I'm breaking that rule anyway. I was 37 in 1993, recently divorced and professionally ambitious in that hollow way people are when they're trying to fill a void with achievement. My marriage to David had ended badly. Not because of affairs or dramatic fights, but because we'd simply stopped seeing each other as anything more than roommates who shared a daughter. Emily took it hard. She was 14 when David and I separated, at that age where everything feels like the end of the world. The custody arrangement gave David primary custody. I got every other weekend and holidays, which felt like a mercy at the time. I wasn't ready to be a full-time mother. I'd never really been ready. David was a high school teacher, stable and present in ways I'd never managed. Emily needed stability. I told myself I was doing the right thing by stepping back, by letting her have the parent who showed up to soccer games and cooked actual meals instead of eating granola bars over a microscope. The truth was simpler and uglier. I chose my work because it was easier than choosing her. My doctorate research focused on volcanic cave systems in the Pacific Northwest. The Gifford Pinchot National Forest sits on top of massive lava flows from Mount St. Helens and older volcanic activity. Underground, there are miles of tubes and chambers where molten rock once flowed. Most had been mapped by the early 90s, but there were gaps in the surveys, areas too remote or too dangerous to explore thoroughly. I wanted to fill those gaps. I applied for grants, bought equipment, spent weeks alone in the forest with topographical maps and ground-penetrating radar. The university loved it. Solo fieldwork from a woman in a male-dominated field made for good publicity. They didn't ask too many questions about my methods or safety protocols. I worked alone because I preferred it that way. No assistants, no partners, no one to witness how many hours I could spend underground without thinking about the surface world. Down there, with my headlamp and measuring tools, everything made sense. Rocks didn't lie. Stone didn't judge. The darkness didn't care that I was a terrible mother. The winter of 1993 into 94 was brutal. Heavy snows closed most of the forest roads by December. I waited until February to resume fieldwork, parking my truck at a ranger station and hiking in with a week's worth of supplies. I had 3 areas marked on my map as potential unmapped systems. The first 2 were dead ends, just shallow depressions that barely qualified as caves. The third was different. I found it on the 4th day, tucked into a ravine I'd walked past twice without noticing. A rockfall partially obscured the entrance, but there was a gap large enough to squeeze through. I could feel air moving, which meant the system was extensive. I should have marked it and returned with proper support. That's protocol. But I was already unpacking my basmaya, rope and harness, already convincing myself that a quick preliminary survey wouldn't hurt. I've had 31 years to regret that decision. The entrance was tight, barely wide enough for my body and pack. I had to remove my harness and push it ahead of me, crawling on my belly through 20 feet of narrow passage. My headlamp caught glimpses of smooth walls, too smooth for natural formation. That should have stopped me. It didn't. The passage opened into a chamber that took my breath away. My light couldn't find the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above me. I stood up slowly, dirt and rock dust falling from my jacket, and tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a lava tube. The formation was wrong, the angles too deliberate. Someone had excavated this space, expanded it, shaped it over time. The floor was level, cleared of debris. Along one wall, stones were stacked in careful piles, sorted by size. I pulled out my camera and notebook, falling into the familiar ritual of documentation. Dimensions, geological composition, structural integrity. I was so focused on the scientific details that it took me almost 20 minutes to notice the paintings. They covered the eastern wall, rendered in charcoal in what looked like clay pigments. Figures, human-shaped but larger, engaged in activities I recognized: hunting, gathering, family groups sitting in circles. The style was crude but intentional, narrative storytelling preserved on stone. My hands started shaking. I'd found plenty of caves with Native American artifacts before, and protocol was clear. Document, mark, report, leave everything untouched. But these paintings weren't Native American. The figures were wrong, too large, too heavily built. I was still photographing when I heard it. A sound from deeper in the cave system, echoing through tunnels I hadn't explored yet. Not animal, not human, something between. A low vocalization that raised every hair on my neck. I froze, headlamp pointed at the darkness where the main chamber narrowed into what looked like multiple passages. My rational mind insisted it was wind, or settling rock, or my imagination. But my body knew better. My body wanted to run. I took 3 steps backward, toward the entrance I'd crawled through. That's when the ground shifted. Later, I understood what happened. The chamber sat in an area of unstable volcanic rock, fractured by centuries of freeze-thaw cycles. My presence, my weight on already stressed stone, triggered a collapse in the entrance tunnel. Not a catastrophic cave-in, just enough rockfall to seal the passage I'd used to enter. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I dropped to my knees, arms over my head, as dust and debris rained down. When the rumbling stopped, I turned my headlamp back toward the entrance. It was gone, buried under tons of broken rock. I ran to the collapse, started pulling at stones with my bare hands. Some came away easily. Others were wedged tight, immovable. I worked for what felt like hours, making almost no progress, until I put my weight wrong on a loose rock and felt my ankle roll sideways. The pain was instant and absolute. I went down hard, gasping. I sat on the cave floor, cradling my ankle and trying not to panic. My headlamp illuminated about 30 feet of space around me. Beyond that was absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that exists nowhere on the surface, so complete it feels solid. I'd been caving long enough to know the dangers. Cave-ins, hypothermia, disorientation, running out of light. I had protocols for emergencies, but all of them assumed I could walk out or call for help. Neither option was available now. My ankle was already swelling inside my boot, sprained at minimum, possibly fractured. I'd packed 3 days of food and water, standard for a week-long expedition. My headlamp had fresh batteries, maybe 12 hours of life. I had a backup flashlight and spare batteries in my pack. I forced myself to think logically. The university knew my general location. When I didn't return in a week, they'd send someone looking. The ranger station had my vehicle information. Search and rescue could find the cave entrance eventually, clear the debris, pull me out. I just had to survive until then. I unpacked my supplies, taking inventory. Granola bars, dried fruit, water bottles, first aid kit, my sleeping bag and thermal blanket. Fire starting kit, though burning anything underground seemed suicidal without knowing the ventilation. My field notebook and pens, camera with 2 rolls of film. I'd done stupider things in caves before. This was just another problem to solve with preparation and patience. That's what I told myself anyway. Then I heard the sound again, closer this time. Definitely not wind or settling rock. A breathing pattern, heavy and deliberate, something large moving through the darkness beyond my light's reach. I grabbed the can of bear spray from my pack, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I'd carried it for years, never expecting to use it. Now I pointed it at the darkness like a weapon, thumb on the trigger. The breathing stopped. Silence fell over the cave, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I swept my headlamp across the chamber, trying to penetrate the shadows. Nothing moved. Nothing revealed itself. But I knew, with the certainty that comes from millions of years of evolution, that I wasn't alone. Minutes passed. My hands cramped from gripping the bear spray. My injured ankle throbbed in rhythm with my pulse. I wanted to call out, to demand that whatever was out there show itself. But some instinct kept me quiet. Then, at the very edge of my light's reach, I saw it. A shape, massive and dark, standing in the mouth of one of the side tunnels. Too tall to be a bear, too broad to be human. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me from the shadows. We stayed like that, predator and prey, though I wasn't sure which role I occupied. My finger tightened on the bear spray trigger. The shape didn't advance, didn't retreat. Finally, after what might have been seconds or hours, it turned and disappeared back into the tunnel. I heard footsteps, heavy but surprisingly quiet, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other, and waited for dawn that would never come underground. The first day passed in a haze of pain and fear. I tried again to clear the entrance, dragging myself across the floor and clawing at rocks until my fingers bled. It was useless. The collapse was too extensive, the stones too heavy. Without proper tools and a working ankle, I had no chance of digging myself out. I retreated to the main chamber and tried to think strategically. Water was my biggest concern. I had enough for maybe 3 days at careful rationing. After that, I'd have to find a source or start making bad decisions. The temperature was constant, probably around 50 degrees. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, but not immediately dangerous if I stayed in my sleeping bag. My food would last longer than my water if I was careful. The creature, if that's what it was, didn't reappear during daylight hours. I use that term loosely since there was no daylight underground, just the arbitrary cycle of my watch telling me when the sun rose and set on a surface I couldn't reach. I spent those first hours exploring the main chamber, moving slowly to avoid aggravating my ankle. The paintings fascinated me despite my situation. They told a story, I realized. Not random images, but a chronological narrative running left to right along the wall. The leftmost paintings showed large groups, maybe 20 or 30 figures gathered together. Family units, adults, and smaller figures that might be children. They were hunting what looked like elk or deer, working in coordinated groups. As the narrative progressed, the groups got smaller. 10 figures, then 5, then 3. The final paintings showed only 2 figures, one larger than the other, and in the very last image, just one figure, alone. A history of extinction, rendered in charcoal on stone. I was photographing these images when I heard it again. Not breathing this time, but movement, something heavy being dragged across stone. The sound came from one of the side passages, the same one where I'd seen the shape the night before. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. Nothing visible, but the noise continued. Scraping, shuffling, purposeful movement. Then it stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then something rolled out of the darkness into my light, a container woven from bark strips in a crude but functional pattern. Inside, water. Clear and cold, probably from an underground stream I hadn't found. I stared at it, trying to process what this meant. The creature, whatever it was, had brought me water. It had observed my situation and responded with help. I crawled forward and picked up the container. The craftsmanship was rough but effective, the bark strips twisted and layered to prevent leaking. This wasn't animal behavior. This was tool creation, problem solving, empathy. I looked up at the tunnel entrance and spoke into the darkness. "Thank you." My voice sounded strange after hours of silence, too loud in the enclosed space. No response came from the shadows. But I felt, rather than saw, that I was being observed. I drank some of the water. It tasted clean, mineral-rich but not contaminated. Whoever or whatever had brought it knew the difference between safe and unsafe sources. That night, I slept better. Not peacefully, but without the terror of the previous night. Fear, I was beginning to understand, was a choice, and I was choosing, tentatively, to trust. By the third day, I'd run out of food. My granola bars were gone, the dried fruit consumed, even the emergency rations I'd packed depleted. The water container had been refilled twice while I slept, left in the same spot like an offering. I was weak from hunger and lack of movement. My ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, purple and hot to the touch. I needed protein, calories, something more than water to survive. That afternoon, I heard the familiar scraping sound. This time I watched as something was pushed into the light from the tunnel entrance. Not just water, but food. Cave mushrooms, white and bulbous, still dirt covered from harvesting. A pile of roots I didn't recognize, thick and fibrous, and fish, 2 of them, freshly killed but not cooked. I examined each item carefully. The mushrooms looked like a species I knew from undergraduate biology, edible and common in cave systems. The roots were unfamiliar, but they smelled clean, almost sweet. The fish were trout, probably from the underground stream. The message was clear. Eat this, stay alive. I used my pocket knife to clean the fish, grateful for the protein even if I had to eat it raw. The mushrooms I consumed cautiously, just a few pieces at first, waiting to see if they made me sick. The roots I saved for later, still uncertain. While I ate, I thought about my benefactor. I'd caught glimpses over the past days, never a clear view, but enough to form an impression. Massive size, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur or hair. Bipedal movement, walking upright like a human, but with a different gait. The scientific part of my brain insisted on classification, on fitting this creature into known taxonomy. But nothing fit. Too large for any known primate. Wrong proportions for a bear. Behavior too complex for any animal I'd studied. I started calling it Atlas, in my mind at least. Atlas holding up the weight of the earth, alone in the darkness, sustaining both of us. That evening, I decided to attempt communication. I gathered stones from the floor and arranged them in a simple pattern, a circle with a line through it. The universal symbol for self, for individual identity. Then, I sat back and waited. Hours passed. I was starting to think the gesture had been meaningless when I heard movement. Atlas emerged from the tunnel, moving slowly, cautiously. This was the closest it had come, maybe 30 feet away. I could see it more clearly now. The body structure was humanoid, but heavier, more muscular. The face was partially obscured by shadow, but I caught glimpses of features that weren't quite human, weren't quite ape. Atlas approached the stone pattern I'd made. It studied the arrangement for a long moment, then looked at me. Even in the poor light, I could see intelligence in those eyes. Not animal awareness, but thought, consideration, understanding. Atlas reached down and moved one stone, adding it to the pattern. Then, it touched its chest with one massive hand and made a sound, low and resonant. Not words, but meaning. A name, perhaps, or an acknowledgement. I touched my own chest. "Sarah," I said clearly. Atlas tilted its head, processing. It tried to replicate the sound, but couldn't quite manage it. Instead, it made a different sound. 2 syllables that might have been an approximation, or might have been its own designation for me. We'd made contact. Real, intentional communication between 2 conscious beings. I smiled, and Atlas, I swear, smiled back. Over the next week, Atlas and I developed a cautious routine. It would appear twice a day, morning and evening by my watch, bringing food and fresh water. The offerings evolved, becoming more varied and prepared. Mushrooms cleaned of dirt, fish gutted and ready to eat, roots cut into manageable pieces. I stopped thinking of myself as trapped and started thinking of myself as housed. The distinction mattered. One implied helplessness, the other implied choice, even if that choice was limited. My ankle was healing slowly. I'd fashioned a splint from sticks and strips of cloth torn from my extra shirt. The swelling had reduced, and I could put weight on it for short periods. In another week, maybe 2, I'd be able to attempt climbing out, assuming I could clear enough of the debris. But I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. Atlas began teaching me through demonstration. It showed me which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would make me sick. It taught me to listen to water sounds echoing through the cave system, to distinguish between flowing streams and stagnant pools. It demonstrated how to move quietly on stone, how to navigate in darkness using sound and touch. These weren't animal behaviors. These were lessons, intentionally given. I named the main chamber the gallery because of the paintings. Atlas spent hours there with me, pointing at different images and making sounds I slowly began to recognize. The same sounds for similar concepts. A grunt for hunting, a whistle for water, a rumble for danger. One evening, Atlas led me to a section of paintings I'd missed, hidden in an alcove near the floor. These images were different, more recent, rendered in what looked like charcoal made from burned wood. They showed humans, not the large figures that dominated the other paintings, but regular people. Hunters with guns, loggers with axes, surveyors with equipment that looked disturbingly similar to what I carried. Each human figure was surrounded by the larger figures, Atlas's kind, fleeing or hiding. The narrative was clear. Humans came, and Atlas's people disappeared. I looked at Atlas, understanding flooding through me. "You're the last one," I said softly. "Aren't you? The last one here." Atlas made a sound I'd learned to recognize as affirmation. It touched the painting showing a single large figure, alone in darkness. Then, it touched its own chest. We sat together in silence, 2 isolated creatures who'd found each other by accident. I thought about my own life, my failed marriage, my estranged daughter, my choice to hide underground doing research instead of facing what I'd broken. Atlas and I weren't so different, both hiding from a world that had become too painful, both carrying losses we couldn't articulate. I reached out slowly, giving Atlas time to move away. It didn't. I placed my hand against its arm, feeling coarse hair over muscle and warm skin. Atlas covered my hand with its own, a gesture so human it made my throat tight. We stayed like that for a long time, 2 beings who shouldn't have been able to understand each other, connected by the universal language of loneliness. That night, I wrote in my field journal the first entry in days. Not scientific observations, but something more personal. A record of connection. A documentation of civilization that wasn't measured by technology, but by capacity for empathy. 3 weeks underground, and I'd stopped counting days in the normal way. Time became measured in Atlas's visits, and meals shared, in the slow healing of my ankle. I'd explored more of the cave system, hobbling on my improving leg with Atlas as a guide. The network was extensive, tunnels branching off in multiple directions, some natural and some clearly excavated over time. Atlas showed me the food storage chamber, a cool alcove where mushrooms grew in cultivated beds, where roots were kept in woven baskets, where dried fish hung from carved stone hooks. This wasn't scavenging. This was agriculture, preservation, planning for the future. The sleeping chamber contained bedding made from moss and bark, layered deep and surprisingly soft. The walls were decorated with more paintings, These ones, intimate. Families sleeping together, children playing, everyday moments preserved by someone who wanted to remember. Atlas watched me examine these images, and I saw something in its expression that transcended species. Grief, missing what was lost. I understood that feeling intimately. The most profound discovery came in the fourth week. Atlas led me down a tunnel I'd avoided before, deeper into the earth where the air grew colder and the silence more absolute. We emerged into a chamber I immediately recognized as sacred space, the burial chamber. Bodies wrapped in bark, arranged carefully along the walls. I counted 9, ranging in size from small, possibly children, to massive, even larger than Atlas. Each wrapped bundle was surrounded by objects, stones arranged in patterns, carved pieces of wood, woven bark containers, grave goods, ritual burial, mourning practices that implied belief in something beyond death. I stood in that chamber, understanding the weight of what I was seeing. This was proof of everything science claimed couldn't exist, not just a creature, but a culture, a civilization that had existed alongside humans, hidden in the margins, dying in silence. Atlas knelt beside the smallest bundle, touched it with gentle reverence. It made a sound, low and mournful, that needed no translation. Loss was loss, regardless of species. I knelt beside Atlas, ignoring the protest from my healing ankle. I didn't have words that would matter, so I offered presence instead. I placed my hand on its shoulder, a gesture of shared grief. We stayed there for over an hour, 2 mourners in a tomb, connected by the understanding that death takes everything we love eventually. When we finally left the burial chamber, I felt changed. This wasn't about discovering a new species anymore. This was about witnessing the end of a people, about being trusted with their final chapter. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't report this, not the cave, not Atlas, not any of it. When I got out, I'd destroy my notes, bury my photographs, pretend I'd found nothing. Some discoveries aren't meant to be shared. Some beings deserve to die in peace, unmolested by scientific curiosity or human greed. Atlas seemed to understand my decision without explanation. Perhaps it read my body language, or perhaps it simply knew. Either way, when I looked into its eyes that evening, I saw something new: trust, complete and absolute. I'd been given a gift more precious than any academic achievement. I'd been chosen as witness to something the world thought impossible, and I was choosing to protect it rather than exploit it. That choice felt like the first truly good thing I'd done in years. By the 5th week, my ankle had healed enough for me to test the entrance debris. I spent an afternoon carefully removing rocks, assessing whether I could create a passage large enough to crawl through. It was possible, I realized. Difficult and dangerous, but possible. I could leave. The question was whether I wanted to. On the surface, search parties were probably looking for me. My university would be concerned. My ex-husband David would be worried, maybe. Emily, my daughter, might be scared or angry or both. I'd been a terrible mother, I knew that. Absent even when present, more interested in rocks than in her life. The divorce had been mutual, but the custody arrangement had been my suggestion. I'd told myself Emily needed stability, needed David's consistency. Really, I'd needed the freedom to disappear into my work without guilt. Down here with Atlas, I couldn't hide from those truths anymore. The darkness reflected everything back at me, all my failures and selfish choices. Atlas's presence, so gentle despite its size, made me confront what I lacked: the capacity for consistent care, the willingness to put someone else's needs first. I sat in the gallery chamber that evening, watching Atlas arrange stones in patterns that seemed to have meaning I couldn't quite grasp. It worked with focused attention, adjusting each stone precisely, creating something beautiful from ordinary materials. I pulled out my field journal and started writing, not scientific notes, but a letter I'd never sent. To Emily. Trying to explain why I'd been such a failure as a mother, why I'd chosen rocks and caves over dance recitals and bedtime stories. Atlas noticed my distress, the way my hand shook as I wrote. It moved closer, sat beside me with careful gentleness, and made a questioning sound. I showed it the photograph I carried in my wallet. Emily at 13, before the divorce, smiling in her soccer uniform. Atlas studied the image with focused attention, then looked at me. It touched the photograph, then touched my chest over my heart. Then it gestured to the burial chamber, to the smallest wrapped figure. The message was clear. Atlas understood family, understood loss, understood that the pain of separation was worse than death because it was chosen. Your child, Atlas seemed to be saying, still alive, still needing you, still waiting. I broke down, sobbing in a way I hadn't since the divorce. Atlas pulled me close, wrapped its massive arms around me, and held me while I grieved for everything I'd destroyed through neglect and cowardice. That embrace, warm and solid and utterly accepting, taught me something crucial. Comfort wasn't about words or explanations. It was about presence, about showing up, about being willing to witness pain without trying to fix it. When I finally stopped crying, Atlas released me and pointed at the entrance tunnel. Then it pointed at the photograph of Emily. Go back, it seemed to say, while you still can. But I shook my head. Not yet. Atlas was sick, I'd realized over the past week. Subtle signs that I'd missed at first, breathing that seemed labored, movements that were slower, more careful, a cough that echoed through the tunnels at night. Atlas was dying, and it was alone. I couldn't leave it. Not yet. Not like this. So I stayed, choosing for once to be present for someone who needed me, even if that someone wasn't human. The 9th week brought changes I could no longer ignore. Atlas's health was deteriorating rapidly. The cough had become constant, wet, and painful. It moved with obvious difficulty, resting more frequently, eating less. I had basic medical training from my fieldwork, enough to recognize respiratory illness when I saw it. But I had no antibiotics, no way to treat whatever infection was ravaging Atlas's system. I could only offer comfort and presence. Atlas knew it was dying. I saw that knowledge in its eyes, in the way it moved through the cave system like someone saying goodbye to a beloved home. It spent hours in the burial chamber, sitting with the wrapped bodies of its family, making sounds that resonated with grief and acceptance. During this time, Atlas became urgently focused on teaching me, not survival skills anymore, but something deeper. Cultural transmission, the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. It showed me how to read the forest above through sounds in the earth. The rumble of heavy machinery meant logging operations. The rhythmic pounding meant construction. The high-pitched whine meant surveying equipment, humans mapping the land for exploitation. Atlas taught me to identify these threats by vibration alone, a skill developed over generations of hiding, of survival through awareness. It demonstrated rituals I didn't fully understand, arrangements of stones in specific patterns, songs, if you could call them that, vocalizations that seemed to hold meaning beyond simple communication, ways of moving through the forest that left minimal trace. One evening, Atlas led me to a section of wall I'd overlooked. It picked up a piece of charcoal and began drawing, creating a new painting with slow, deliberate strokes. The image showed two figures, one large and one small, sitting together. Between them, objects being exchanged, knowledge passing from teacher to student. When it finished, Atlas turned to me and made a sound I'd learned meant understanding, comprehension, continuation. This is how we survive, it seemed to say, by teaching, by remembering, by passing forward what came before. I understood then what Atlas was doing. It was making me a keeper of memory, a witness to a people who would soon exist only in paintings and stories. It was ensuring that when it died, something of its kind would persist through me. The responsibility was overwhelming. I was a scientist, trained to document and publish, to share discoveries with the world. But Atlas was asking me to do the opposite, to keep secrets, to protect rather than expose, to honor privacy over prestige. I took the charcoal from Atlas's hand and added to the painting. A third figure, smaller, representing Emily, a connection between what I was learning here and what I needed to carry back to the surface. Atlas nodded, understanding. Then it touched my face with gentle fingers and made a sound like approval. That night, Atlas collapsed while returning to its sleeping chamber. I heard the thud from where I sat in the gallery, ran as fast as my healed ankle would allow. I found it lying on the stone floor, breathing shallow and rapid. I couldn't move it. couldn't lift something that probably weighed 500 pounds. So I brought bedding instead, made Atlas as comfortable as possible, and sat vigil. Atlas didn't die that night, but I knew the end was approaching. It lay in the sleeping chamber, breathing labored, occasionally coughing up fluid that looked dark even in my headlamp's beam. I'd seen pneumonia before, recognized the symptoms of lungs filling, drowning from the inside. I couldn't save it. I could only stay. I sat beside Atlas, talking softly about everything and nothing. I told it about Martha, Earl's story from the reference text echoing in my mind, about how grief is universal. I told it about Emily, about my failures as a mother, about fear and isolation, and the lies we tell ourselves to justify running away. Atlas listened, or seemed to. Its eyes tracked my face, its breathing adjusted to the rhythm of my voice. Even dying, it offered presence. On what I thought might be the last day, Atlas rallied briefly. It struggled to sit up, gesturing for me to help. Together, we made our way to the burial chamber, moving slowly, stopping frequently. Atlas showed me how to prepare a body for burial. The specific way to wrap bark, the patterns to arrange stones, the placement of grave goods that held meaning. It was teaching me its own funeral rites, ensuring the knowledge wouldn't die with it. We worked together for hours, Atlas demonstrating on one of the already wrapped bodies, me practicing until I understood. The intimacy of this education, the trust it implied, made my throat tight with emotion. When Atlas was satisfied, I understood. It led me back to the gallery chamber. There, it gestured at all the paintings, at the history preserved on stone walls. Then it touched its chest, then mine. Remember, it seemed to say, tell the story, but protect the place, I promised, out loud, clearly, knowing Atlas couldn't understand English, but hoping it understood intent. I will remember, I will protect this place. You won't be forgotten. Atlas made that rumbling sound of approval one last time. Then it pulled something from a crevice I'd never noticed, a bundle wrapped in bark, small and carefully preserved. Inside were treasures, carved stones, pieces of worked wood, a woven bracelet made from plant fibers, personal possessions, things that mattered. Atlas pressed them into my hands. Proof, I realized, evidence that this had been real, that Atlas had existed, that I hadn't imagined any of it. I accepted the gifts with shaking hands, understanding the magnitude of what was being entrusted to me. These weren't just objects. They were legacy, memory, the final trace of a dying people. That night, I lay beside Atlas in the sleeping chamber, our backs against the wall, my small body next to its massive frame. We breathed together in the darkness, two beings from impossible worlds who'd found connection in isolation. Atlas's breathing grew shallower as night progressed. I felt it happening, the slow withdrawal of life, but I didn't panic. I just stayed close, one hand resting against its arm, offering whatever comfort presence could provide. Some lessons I'd learned can only be taught in silence. As Atlas's breathing slowed, I thought about everything it had shown me. That civilization isn't measured by technology, but by capacity for love. That some beings deserve protection more than they deserve discovery. That survival isn't about living longest, it's about living truthfully. Atlas died just before dawn on December 14th, 1994. I knew it was morning only by my watch, deep underground where the sun never reached. It went peacefully, breath simply stopping between one moment and the next. I sat beside the body for a long time, not quite believing it was over. 9 months I'd spent in this cave, and for most of that time, Atlas had been my only companion, my teacher, my unexpected friend. Now I was alone in a way I'd never been before. I had work to do, rituals to perform, promises to keep. I couldn't fall apart yet. Following Atlas's instructions, I wrapped the body in bark strips, working slowly despite my grief. It took hours to gather enough material, to layer it properly, to ensure the wrapping was secure and respectful. I carried stones from the gallery chamber, arranged them around the body in the patterns Atlas had taught me. Each stone placed with intention, creating meaning I only partially understood, but executed with complete commitment. The grave goods came last. I added the woven water container, the first gift Atlas had given me. tools it had made, carved from wood and stone, pieces of its life, its culture, preserved for whatever came after. I worked through the night and into the next day, preparing Atlas's resting place with the same care it had shown teaching me. When everything was ready, I sat beside the wrapped body and spoke the words I wished I'd said while Atlas could hear them. Thank you for seeing me when I didn't want to be seen. Thank you for teaching me that presence matters more than perfection. Thank you for showing me that humanity isn't the only measure of consciousness or worth. My voice echoed in the burial chamber, joining the silence of 9 other bodies. 10 now. An entire community gone, leaving only paintings and wrapped bones. I took one last photograph using my camera's flash in the darkness. Not of Atlas's body, that felt wrong, but of the burial chamber as a whole. Documentation, yes, but also memorial. Proof that this place had mattered, that these beings had lived and loved and died with dignity. Then I gathered my remaining supplies and made my way to the entrance tunnel. The debris I'd been slowly clearing was almost passable now. Another day of work, maybe 2, and I could squeeze through. But first, I had one final task. I spent 3 days sealing the tunnel that led to the burial chamber, moving rocks and debris until the entrance was completely hidden. Anyone who found this cave system in the future would see only the main gallery chamber. The sacred spaces, the bodies, the most intimate evidence of Atlas's people would remain protected. This was my final promise. To keep their deaths private, their resting place secure, their memory preserved only in ways that honored rather than exploited. On December 20th, I climbed out of the cave system into blinding winter sunlight. 9 months underground had made my eyes sensitive, the brightness physically painful. I stood at the entrance, shading my face, breathing surface air that tasted thin and strange after so long below. I was changed in ways I couldn't articulate. Thinner, weaker physically, but stronger in undefined ways, carrying knowledge that would shape the rest of my life. I sealed the entrance behind me as best I could, obscuring it with branches and rocks, making it nearly invisible to casual observation. Then I walked away, leaving Atlas to rest in peace. The hike back to the ranger station took 2 days. My body, weakened by months of limited nutrition and movement, could only manage a few hours before exhaustion forced me to rest. I'd packed light, carrying only my journal, camera, and the small bundle of gifts Atlas had given me. I'd destroyed my field notes before leaving the cave, burning them page by page using my fire starting kit. The official documentation of my discovery, reduced to ash and scattered in the underground stream. The photographs I'd taken of the cave system I exposed to light, ruining the film. Only my personal journal remained and the few images of the burial chamber I'd kept, as memory, not evidence. When I reached the ranger station, my truck was still there, covered in snow and ice. The rangers were shocked to see me, called immediately for medical support. They'd given up searching weeks ago, assumed I had died in the wilderness. The story I told was simple and mostly true. I'd found a cave system, gotten trapped by a collapse, survived on underground water and cavefish until I could dig myself out. I claimed to have spent most of the time in a single chamber, healing my injured ankle, rationing my supplies. No mention of Atlas, no mention of the paintings or the burial chamber or the lessons learned in darkness. Just a tale of survival and luck. The paramedics examined me at the station, concerned by my weight loss and weakened condition, but finding nothing requiring hospitalization. I'd been careful to injure myself slightly during the climb out, scrapes and bruises consistent with digging through rock, evidence supporting my story. The university was relieved and furious in equal measure. Relieved I'd survived, furious I'd violated protocol by working alone in unmapped systems. They suspended my research pending a safety review, exactly what I'd expected. I didn't care. I was done with academic geology anyway. The first call I made was to David. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Sarah, Jesus Christ, where have you been?" "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "I'm so sorry for everything." There was silence on the line. Then I heard Emily's voice in the background, asking if it was me. David handed her the phone. "Mom?" Hearing her voice broke something in me that 9 months underground hadn't touched. I started crying, unable to speak for a moment. "I'm here," I finally managed. "I'm sorry I was gone. I'm sorry for so much more than that." We talked for an hour, Emily asking questions I couldn't fully answer, me apologizing for years of absence and neglect. David took the phone back eventually, suggested I come to their house when I was ready, said Emily needed to see me, needed to know I was real. I promised I would come. Soon. As soon as I took care of a few things. Those things included finding a safe deposit box in Bellingham, securing it under a false name, and locking away everything I'd kept. The journal, the photographs, the gifts from Atlas, evidence I'd never show anyone, proof I'd carry to my grave. I also quit my doctorate program, officially for health reasons. Really because I couldn't pretend anymore that rocks mattered more than people. I needed to learn how to be present, how to show up, how to be the kind of person Atlas had been, choosing connection over isolation. I moved back to Olympia in January of 1995, renting a small apartment 20 minutes from David and Emily's house. The transition to surface life was harder than I'd expected. Colors seemed too bright, sounds too loud, the pace of everything overwhelming after months of cave silence. I took a job as a consultant for environmental groups, using my geological knowledge to assess land for conservation protection. It paid poorly compared to academic work, but it felt right. Using what I knew to preserve rather than exploit. Emily and I started having weekly dinners, just the two of us. Awkward at first, neither of us sure how to bridge the gap of years, but slowly, tentatively, we rebuilt something. Not the mother-daughter relationship I'd failed at before, but something new. More honest, less performative. I told her I'd changed during those months underground, that I'd learned things about myself I didn't like, and was trying to be better. I didn't explain how or why, just that I was trying. She accepted that, cautiously. Teenagers are resilient and suspicious in equal measure. I started therapy too, working through the divorce, the isolation, the choices that had led me to that cave in the first place. My therapist suggested I'd been running from intimacy, using work as a shield against vulnerability. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't tell her about Atlas, about the real reason I'd changed. That conversation would lead to questions I couldn't answer, evaluations I didn't want. Some truths are too strange to share. Instead, I processed it alone, late at night, reading my journal entries and remembering. The weight of Atlas's hand on my shoulder, the sound of its breathing in the darkness, the careful way it had taught me to see the world differently. I visited the Yar cave site 4 times that first year, hiking in under the pretense of checking on environmental conditions for my consulting work. Each time, I confirmed the entrance remained sealed, the location undiscovered. I left small offerings, feeling foolish but compelled. Stones arranged in patterns, flowers in summer, a quiet acknowledgement that I remembered. The lessons Atlas taught me became the foundation of how I lived. When Emily was frustrated with school, I offered presents instead of solutions, sitting with her while she worked through problems. When David remarried, I attended the wedding and felt genuinely happy for him, understanding that love isn't diminished by being shared. I slowed down, paid attention, noticed the world around me instead of always looking ahead to the next achievement. I stopped measuring my worth by productivity and started measuring it by presence, by moments of connection, by the small ways I showed up for people who needed me. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't become a saint or a perfect mother, but I became present, which was more than I'd been before. By 1997, Emily and I had developed an actual relationship. She told me about boys she liked, struggles with friends, fears about college. I listened without judgment, offered perspective without lectures, showed up to her soccer games and school events. I was learning, slowly, how to be the kind of parent she deserved, the kind of person Atlas had been, offering steady presence without expectation or demand. Some nights I'd dream about the cave, about Atlas sitting beside me in the darkness, and I'd wake with tears on my face and gratitude in my heart for having known something so rare. The years passed quietly. Emily graduated high school in 1998, went to college in Seattle. I attended her graduation, sat beside David and his new wife, and felt proud in a way I'd never experienced before. Proud not of achievement, but of connection. I continued my conservation work, advocating for land protection in the Cascade region. I became known as someone who understood the ecological value of old-growth forests, of watershed protection, of preserving spaces where wilderness could persist. I never mentioned the real reason I fought so hard, that somewhere in those forests, a burial chamber held the remains of people who died because humans took everything they needed to survive. I visited the cave site less frequently as time went on. Once a year became every few years. Not because I forgot, but because I understood Atlas didn't need my visits. The dead don't require witnesses, they just require protection. Emily got married in 2003. I walked her down the aisle, my ex-husband having offered me that honor in recognition of how much I'd changed. During the ceremony, I thought about Atlas, about chosen family, about how connection transcends biology and expectation. That same year, my health began declining. Small things at first: fatigue, shortness of breath, a persistent cough that reminded me uncomfortably of Atlas's final weeks. I ignored it for months, then finally saw a doctor when Emily insisted. Lung cancer, stage 3. Probably from years of exposure to volcanic dust and mineral particles in caves, though the doctors couldn't say for certain. I was 66 years old, the same age Atlas had been when we met, by my best estimate. The symmetry felt appropriate somehow. Treatment was grueling. Chemotherapy that left me weak and nauseous, radiation that burned my chest. I endured it for Emily, for the chance to see her have children, to continue being present for as long as possible. The cancer went into remission for a while. 5 years where I thought maybe I'd beaten it, where I watched my granddaughter be born and take her first steps and speak her first words. Then, in 2012, it came back. Metastasized to my bones, my liver, spreading too fast for treatment to control. The doctors gave me months, maybe a year. I moved into a care facility in Olympia, close to Emily and her family. The same facility where I'm writing this now, watching rain streak the windows and thinking about darkness underground. Emily visited yesterday, found my journal while helping me organize belongings. She read enough to know I'd been lying about the 9 months I disappeared, that something happened I'd never explained. She sat beside my bed, holding the journal, and asked me directly, "Mom, what really happened in that cave?" I looked at my daughter, 55 years old now, gray in her hair and worry in her eyes. I thought about Atlas, about the trust it had placed in me, about promises made in darkness, and I decided she deserved the truth. Not the world, not science, not anyone who would turn Atlas's resting place into a spectacle. But Emily, yes, she'd earned that through years of patience, through choosing to rebuild our relationship when she had every right to walk away. So I told her everything. This whole story, from finding the cave to Atlas's death, to the lessons learned in between. Emily listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time, processing what I'd told her. I couldn't read her expression, couldn't tell if she believed me or thought the cancer had spread to my brain. Finally, she spoke. "Can you prove it? The journal entries, the photographs?" I nodded toward the closet where I kept my personal effects. In the safe deposit box key, in my wallet, everything's there, everything I kept. She retrieved the key, held it in her hand like it might burn her. "Why are you telling me now, after 30 years? Because I'm dying. And you deserve to know why I changed, why I came back different, why I suddenly cared about being your mother when I'd been absent for so long." I paused, gathering strength. And because someone needs to protect that place after I'm gone. Someone needs to know the location, needs to ensure it stays sealed, needs to continue what I promised. You want me to keep your secret. I want you to understand why it needs to stay secret. Those beings, Atlas's people, they deserve peace. They deserve privacy and death. The world doesn't need to know they existed. It just needs to leave them alone. Emily stood, paced to the window, looked out at the rain. If this is real, if you really spent 9 months underground with a creature that shouldn't exist, this is the biggest discovery in human history. You're asking me to help bury it. I'm asking you to honor the wishes of someone who trusted me when they had no reason to, who showed me kindness when they were dying, who taught me how to be present, how to see value beyond what can be extracted or exploited. I struggled to sit up straighter, pain shooting through my chest. The world has enough discoveries, enough spectacles, enough ways to turn sacred things into entertainment. Atlas doesn't need to be on the cover of National Geographic. Those bones don't need to be in a museum. That place doesn't need to be a tourist attraction. What does it need? To be left alone, to remain undisturbed, to be remembered privately, with respect. Emily turned from the window, tears in her eyes. Did this really happen, Mom? Or is this a story you've told yourself so many times you believe it? I pulled out the bundle from my bedside drawer, the one I'd kept with me for 30 years. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were the gifts Atlas had given me. Carved stones showing wear patterns no human tool could create, woven plant fibers and patterns I'd never seen replicated. A piece of worked wood that carbon dating would place centuries old. Emily examined each item carefully, her hands shaking slightly. These could be Native American artifacts or forgeries. They could be, I agreed, but they're not. And in your heart, looking at them, touching them, you know they're not. She set the items down carefully, reverently. The journal mentions lessons, 11 lessons you learned. What were they? I smiled, remembering Atlas's patient teaching. That fear is a choice. That civilization isn't measured by technology. That loss is universal. That protection and control are different things. That one species' progress is another's extinction. That connection matters more than freedom. That simple presence is the greatest gift. That all stories end, but the middle matters. That you can't hide from yourself. That survival requires truth. And that some secrets protect more than they conceal. Emily sat back down beside my bed. You really believe keeping this secret protects something important? I know it does. Atlas trusted me with their people's resting place, with their history, with their dignity in death. Breaking that trust, even after 30 years, would make everything they taught me meaningless. Emily picked up my journal again, flipped through pages filled with sketches and observations. What if I want to see it? The cave? The paintings? The place where this happened? I can give you the location, but only if you promise the same thing I promised, to protect it, to keep it sealed, to never reveal it to anyone who would exploit it. She considered this for a long moment. What about after you're gone? What if someone finds it accidentally, like you did? Then they find it, and I hope they're the kind of person who understands that some mysteries don't need solving. But we can make it less likely. The conservation group I work with, they're trying to protect that entire watershed. If the land is preserved, the chances of discovery drop significantly. You've been working for 30 years to protect a cave no one knows exists. I've been working to honor a promise to a friend. That's how I think of Atlas now. Not a specimen, not a discovery, but a friend who taught me how to live better. Emily set down the journal and took my hand. I need time to process this, to decide if I believe it, to think about what you're asking. I understand. Take all the time you need. The safe deposit box information is in my will. Everything's there, waiting, whether you choose to believe or not. She squeezed my hand gently. The lessons you mentioned, the ones Atlas taught you, they changed you, didn't they? You came back different, present, actually here. They saved me. I was so lost before that cave, so isolated by my own choices. Atlas showed me another way to exist, not through words, but through example. A dying creature spent its last months teaching you how to live. Yes, and I've spent the last 30 years trying to honor that teaching, trying to be present for you the way Atlas was present for me. Emily stayed for another hour, asking questions I answered as honestly as I could. When she left, she took the safe deposit key with her, and I didn't know if she'd use it or throw it away. That night, I lay in my hospital bed thinking about Atlas, about the burial chamber deep underground where 10 bodies rested in peace. I thought about the paintings on stone walls, stories preserved in charcoal and clay. I thought about the weight of Atlas's hand on my shoulder, the sound of its breathing in darkness, the gentle way it had guided me toward being better. I'd kept my promise for 31 years, told no one, published nothing, protected that place through conservation work and careful silence. Now, dying, I'd passed the burden to my daughter, trusting her to decide what truth deserved protection. Some might say I was wrong to hide such a discovery, that science and humanity deserved to know. But I'd learned underground that humanity already knows too much and understands too little. We know how to extract and exploit. We're still learning how to protect and preserve. Atlas had been the last of its kind in that region, maybe in the world. It died alone, teaching a stranger how to be less human and more humane. That lesson, I believed, was worth more than any scientific paper. 3 weeks after I told Emily the truth, she returned to the care facility with a folder of documents. She'd been to the safe deposit box, retrieved everything I'd hidden. The journal, the photographs, the gifts from Atlas, all examined and considered. She sat beside my bed, the folder on her lap. I went to the university library, looked up your research from 1993 and 94. You were mapping volcanic cave systems in Gifford, Pinchot. The records show you checked out ground-penetrating radar equipment, filed expedition plans for the areas you mentioned. You're verifying my story. I'm trying to understand what happened to my mother, why she disappeared for 9 months and came back a different person. She opened the folder, showed me enlarged copies of the photographs I'd taken. The burial chamber, rendered in grainy black and white, the wrapped bodies barely visible in poor light. These could be anything, Mom. Rocks, shadows, wishful thinking captured on film. They could be, but you know they're not. Emily pulled out the carved stones, held one up to the light. I showed these to a friend who works at the Burke Museum. Didn't tell him where I got them, just asked for an opinion. He said the wear patterns are unusual, the carving technique unfamiliar. Could be very old, could be modern. Inconclusive. Because I'm asking you to believe something science says is impossible. She set the stone down carefully. I've been thinking about those lessons you mentioned, the ones Atlas supposedly taught you. They're good lessons, Mom, important ones. But I could find them in any philosophy book, any self-help program. Could you? I met her eyes. Could you find patience demonstrated by a dying creature who spent months teaching a stranger how to see? Could you find forgiveness from someone who'd lost everything to my species but still chose kindness? The lessons aren't the point. Then what is? Emily's voice cracked slightly. That my mother, who was absent and career-obsessed my entire childhood, suddenly came back present and caring. That for the last 30 years, you've been the parent I needed. That change, Mom, that's real, whether or not a Bigfoot caused it. I felt tears building, the kind that come from being truly seen. Atlas was real, Emily. But you're right that what matters is what came after. How I chose to live differently. How I tried to be better for you. She wiped her eyes, composed herself. I visited the conservation group you work with. They're close to securing protection for the entire watershed where you disappeared. Federal wilderness designation, no development, no logging, minimal access. I smiled despite the pain in my chest. That was always the goal. Protect the land. Protect what's buried there. Ensure Atlas and their people can rest undisturbed. I'm going to help them, Mom. I'm donating to the cause, volunteering for advocacy work. Not because I'm sure I believe your story, but because wilderness preservation matters regardless. And the location? The specific cave? Emily pulled out the journal. Found the page where I'd sketched a rough map. I'll keep it secret. I'll protect it the way you protected it. Not for Atlas maybe, but for you. Because you asked me to. Because it clearly matters to you more than anything. That's enough. That's all I can ask. We sat together in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, connected finally in the way I'd wanted for decades. I died 6 weeks later, in late spring of 2025. Peacefully, Emily told me afterward, though I don't remember the moment itself, just a gradual fading, like a headlamp running out of batteries, darkness becoming absolute. But that's not the end of this story. Not quite. Emily honored my wishes completely. She had me cremated, scattered some of my ashes in the Cascade Mountains near where I'd disappeared. The rest she kept, waiting. 2 months after my death, she hiked into Gifford Pinchot National Forest with my journal and a backpack full of supplies. She found the cave entrance using my sketches and notes, located the sealed opening I'd hidden 30 years before. She told me later, much later, that she'd planned to look inside, just to verify, just to know for certain whether her mother had been truthful or delusional. She'd brought climbing equipment, lights, everything needed to descend safely. But when she reached the entrance and started clearing debris, she heard something. Not wind, not animals, something else. A sound that made her stop, made her remember the lessons I'd tried to teach. She sealed the entrance again without looking inside, scattered the remainder of my ashes there, among the rocks and roots, left me to rest near Atlas, two beings who'd found each other in darkness and taught each other about light. Emily became the new keeper of secrets. She's 68 now, the age I was when I told her the truth. She started writing her own account, this one, the story I couldn't finish before dying. She visits the cave site once a year, maintaining the seal, ensuring it remains undiscovered. She's taught her daughter, my granddaughter, about the importance of wilderness preservation without explaining the full reason why that particular watershed matters. The conservation group succeeded in getting federal protection for the area. It's designated wilderness now, protected in perpetuity. No development, no exploitation, no disturbance. Atlas's resting place is safe. Emily still doesn't know if she believes my story completely. Some days she thinks it was real, that I truly spent 9 months learning from an impossible creature. Other days she thinks it was a psychological break, a story I created to make sense of trauma and isolation. But she's realized the truth doesn't matter as much as the meaning. Whether Atlas existed or not, the lessons were real. The change in me was real. The commitment to protection over exploitation, that's real too. She's living those lessons now, choosing presence over productivity, connection over achievement. She's passing them to her children, who will pass them to theirs, an inheritance more valuable than any scientific discovery. Sometimes, late at night, Emily takes out the carved stones and woven artifacts I kept for 30 years. She holds them, feels their weight, and wonders what hands made them, what intelligence guided their creation. She thinks about her mother, who disappeared into a cave and came back changed, who spent 3 decades protecting a secret that might have been delusion or might have been the most important encounter in human history. And she keeps that secret, honors that promise, maintains that protection. Because some things, she's learned, are more important than knowing. Some mysteries deserve to stay mysterious. Some beings, alive or dead, real or imagined, deserve our respect more than our curiosity. And some lessons, taught in darkness by patient teachers, are worth carrying forward regardless of their source.